Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. Today, Aryan and I are going to be discussing something quite different from our normal discussions, but I think it's of equal interest to both of us. Basically, as a small, I guess, context, both of us study in the same school. We study psychology together because we're just interested in how the brain works. And if we're being honest, psychology in school is kind of a bummer because, like, it's too much of like memorization and like studying
Right.
and no one likes that. So,
Yeah.
why we did join psychology is what we're going to try and share with you, which
Yeah.
is the actual theories, because those things are actually really cool, right?
Yeah.
So, like instead of like memorizing like two studies or three studies per single topic, we're just going to explain the topics to you because those things are actually very cool, and we're going to explain like we're going to kind of try to explain them in a practical way. So, yeah, Aryan, why
All
don't we
right.
begin?
Wait, actually, before we get on to the topics, I just want to say why I chose psychology as a subject.
Mm,
And why, without any information on like any of the topics, I just wanted to pick psychology. So the reason was my mom actually had taken psychology in her in her school or whatever. She really loved the subject because all of the topics were so interesting. And I kind of learned something about the subject. Every single topic is applicable to yourself. And
mm,
it's kind of cool how we're going on this whole self-improvement journey, and psychology comes in our lives where everything is about cognition and your mind, and how things work, your behavior, and how it's related to what goes on in your mind,
yeah,
biologically, as well as through hormones and things like everything that just happens in your mind that leads you to
yeah.
do certain actions and things like that. So I found
Yeah.
that really interesting, and I picked the subject. I was a little let's say disappointed when I started going through the the tests of the subject, because honestly learning the subject is super fun. I love having all the
Yeah.
discussions with friends. It's so cool. How like when we learned about schema and things, applying it to stuff that you do in real life, and
Yeah.
in situations you have been through. It's such a cool experience. And things like attribution theory, you kind of just connect
Yeah.
connect to experiences and situations you see in real life. And the tests are just like very very not they don't
Memorization based.
disconnect you, they kind of disconnect you from the
Yeah.
subject.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the first topic, which
Yeah.
is
Before that,
oh, sorry.
even since you
Sorry.
said like why you picked it, I feel like even I want to say it now
Oh,
because
yeah, go ahead, go
yeah,
ahead.
I mean why not? So basically, I feel like I'm just very interested in how the brain works, and I've tried to approach that in one way already before, which is through like biochemistry and like understanding the actual science behind it, right? Which I did through watching a podcast called Huberman Lab. Not watching really. I mean, watching and listening to it. So basically, from that podcast, again, quite a bit of understanding. But I mean, of course, there's a lot left, like a lot left, because the brain is so complex. But it's just very amusing. So I feel like I wanted to take another approach to the same thing, and that's why I did psychology, which is more of like the human science aspect of it rather than like actual empirical science, right?
Right.
So yeah, so that's why I did that. And I feel like one more thing is that let's first like just explain to like the audience, Arjun, how like it's broken out into CLA, SLA, and BLA, right?
Right.
Uh, because okay, I'll just go ahead and say it because psychology is a subject which has multiple approaches to it, although it does converge at a certain point. The approaches to it are actually how at least it's been divided in our board, which is the IB, International Bachelorette. I don't know how to pronounce this, but
Bachelor.
basically,
Yeah.
yeah, basically it's broken down. IB psychology is broken down into cognitive learning approach, social learning approach, and biological learning approach. And as of now, we've only covered the first one, and they're exactly what they sound like. And sorry, it's not social, it's social cultural. And yeah, so cognitive is the first one that we've covered, and I think that's what we're going to talk about mainly today. Maybe in future episodes, we can talk about the SLA and BLA, whatever
Yeah.
like we feel like talking about. But yeah,
I
so
mean, like I said, it's applicable to everything that we talk
yeah,
about.
yeah, exactly. Like the coolest part about psychology is like when we're discussing it, you can be like, oh yeah, remember back then when I did this, I probably
Yeah.
did it because of this bias or because I couldn't remember it, maybe because I didn't encode the information correctly, etc., etc. But I think the best thing about psychology is it helps you become more mindful and like more aware. Because let's
Right.
say, okay, let's say I'm like someone's trying to sell me something, and I'm getting more and more persuaded to buy it. And because now I know about the effects and the biases in thinking and decision making,
Right.
I can be like, wait, I'm actually getting convinced because of this effect. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you can't do anything about it unless you like decide to. I mean, it's just cool to be mindful in that way and like
Right.
have like the technical or conceptual understanding of that as well. So Aryan, why don't you go ahead and start off with the first topic, which
I'll start off. I mean, the biggest topic probably
mm,
in the first, CLA, which is cognitive level of analysis, is probably memory. And before I get into this, you said something about converging, the three SLA, CLA, and BLA, right?
mm,
Um, I think we should have a strong definition for psychology at the start of this. So, psychology comes from the word psyche, and I guess you could say it's a scientific study of the human mind and its functions, and especially those that affect behavior in like given contexts or situations. And so when we're talking about memory, right? Memory, you can kind of imagine it like this huge bag, right?
mm,
Everything that you're a human mind is like a sponge. You keep taking in information, you keep encoding new information, right? You take it from anywhere, your surroundings, people tell you stuff, empirical, conceptual, all that kind of knowledge. You take it in, right?
mm,
And that goes into your basically this bag that I'm conceptualizing right now. This bag, you keep all of that knowledge in this bag, right? The
mm,
job of memory is to store information and encode and retrieve through
mm.
the process of encoding, retrieving, rehearsal, and retention, stuff like that. They're all processes that happen through memory, which is another cognitive process. So can you go in depth, maybe one
Yeah.
aspect, to explain a little bit more on
Yeah.
that?
So as you said, like very beautifully, I think it's like, the analogy you used is perfect. So I think memory is the process of encoding information, retaining information or storing it, and then retrieving it, right? So basically, I mean, the thing is that obviously people wanted to go more in depth, so they came up with multiple models of memory, and like they try to, I guess, further hypothesize like how memory is divided and how memory is, or like how memory is as a system, a process. So with that, we came to the two most popular models of memory. I'll be running you through the first one, and you can talk about the second one.
Right.
The first one was the multi-store model of memory, which was essentially it's exactly what it sounds like. There are many stores of memory. So imagine like exactly the analogy that Aryan used um, about there being one big bag. This model of memory suggests that there's not, okay, say there's one big bag, under that or within that there are three smaller bags, right? The first bag is something called sensory memory, which is, or sense perception memory rather, which is basically a memory which has like a, so each of these stores, right? Each of these stores has a specific or and a unique capacity and duration. So basically, the sense perception memory has a very small capacity relatively to the other one,
Right.
and it has a time duration of about 5 seconds. And basically, what this means is that it's literally what it sounds like again. So we have information all around us, which we perceive through our five senses. And now these five senses can store the information in our brain only for 5 seconds. Now, here's where it gets interesting. After you pay attention, like close attention and deliberate attention to any of any of the like, information in your sensory memory, what happens then is that you is that this information gets carried ahead and moves to the short-term memory stores, right? So the short-term memory is essentially the next store of memory where you have about like 30 seconds of time duration, and there's something called a capacity of 7 plus minus 2 idea chunks or memory chunks, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a unit that's just made up. But essentially, all you have to know is that it has a duration of 30 seconds. And now the cool thing is that when you rehearse this information, right? So earlier, to move this information from short-term memory to from sensory memory
Sensory
to short-term
evolution.
memory, you needed to pay attention to it. Now the condition for short-term memory to move to long-term memory, which is a third store of memory, is that you have to actually rehearse this information in any form. So, and I think that's where like a lot of, I guess, productivity gurus and like they just say like practice it like this, like which is they say like active recall and stuff like that. That's just a way and method of rehearsal which helps you memorize this better. So yeah, and then you move to long-term memory, LTM, which essentially carries and stores, like as far as we know, unlimited information or whatever amount of information our human brain can store, right? So that's what the long-term memory stores. If you would like to add on, Arjun, go ahead. Otherwise, we
Well,
can move to the next model.
yeah, no, I think you made my job a lot easier for explaining the next one. Well, basically, so everything that you like, all the information that you know encode comes through sensory inputs. Like it could be through any what you taste or what you hear, right? And there are two types of ways they could get inputted. You know, there's there's a phonological loop, and then there's a visual spatial sketchpad. This is the working model of memory, by the way.
Yeah.
So basically, basically the input, right? As Sonav explained, you know, the sensory memory, the input lasts for around, what was the time that you said? It was like around
5 seconds. So
5 seconds, right? So the moment you input information, it lasts for 5 seconds in the sensory memory, and as soon as you pay attention to it, right? Now the difference between this model and the last model is there's something called the central executive. You can kind of imagine it as like the conductor of the brain. It takes that information and it puts it into it kind of connects it to your conscious awareness, and where you see through the inner eye and the inner voice. And the moment you pay attention to it, right, it goes into your visual spatial sketchpad and your phonological loop that contains the articulatory control and phonological store, right? Everything that you hear and also everything that you see. And that comes from paying attention. And after you pay attention, you rehearse it, and you go through it, right? That goes straight to the long-term memory, and that stays there for a while. And I wanted to bring this study, and I know we won't
Yeah.
go in detail, but when Sunav mentioned short-term memory, right? I studied this one person called, this one study called Peterson and Peterson, and it kind of tested the the time that short-term
Yeah.
memory lasted. And basically what they did was they put a bunch of trigrams, like random
Yeah,
letters.
and trigrams are just consonants with 3 letters, like 3 consonants, like put,
With
like
no
say,
particular meaning or
like
order.
say TVS. That's one trigram. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So he played so there's a time limit, right? So basically they play some audio or something that kind of messes their that just doesn't, that kind of distracts them from the trigram itself.
Yeah.
And so the trigram, the different time gaps between when the audio is played or whatever that distracts them, and when the trigram is said to them. And basically they realize that the longer the distraction, or the longer the distraction, the more
No,
the harder it comes to
the
remember,
less we remembered it,
the
basically.
less they remember that one trigram, right? And they got around 18 seconds for for a short-term memory, 18 to 20
Yeah,
seconds.
correct. That's right.
So yeah, I mean, that's just something I found interesting. Studies that to be a psychologist, you need to be really creative. Kind of experimenting with how time limits and things like that. It's like how do you really test this thing? You have to go into what it means and understand it like completely, and then just create a situation where you can test that. I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, so moving on to the next topic. I mean, we've covered memory, but the cool thing about memory is that memory is not just these two models, or memory is not just what we think it is. There's so much more about memory. So memory also has a very okay. So if I told you that you were lost, like if I came up to you randomly, say you're walking in a mall with your family, and I came up to you randomly and I said, oh, I remember you from 10 years ago when you were lost, when you got lost in the mall. Is that you? Like maybe you rely on your memory enough to um I guess like there's a slight chance that you do rely on your memory enough to like say, no, that definitely didn't happen. But the thing is that there's a special, I guess, property of memory, can we call it that? Or a characteristic, which is that memory is actually reconstructive, which means that it's not like it's set in stone. You can actually manipulate someone's memory. And of course, there are like ethical considerations, etc. But
Right.
like the thing about memory is that under certain conditions, such as like misleading questions and like gaining trust from like or like say if in the same scenario I told your family to tell you that you got lost in the mall and I was the stranger who found you, like if your family suggests that to you, if I gave you a few misleading questions, like do you remember when you came with your dog, and let's say that was an actual memory, right? Like you're actually pretty likely to make up that memory, which is crazy. You're literally reconstructing your own
Is
memory.
memory really reliable,
Yeah,
so
the question, yeah, that's the question that this entire theory brings. That is memory even reliable? So, again, not going into studies, but the point is that this was used in like eyewitness testimonies, um, and like, and there were many cases of people who saw a stranger and actually blamed that stranger for like causing or for like harassing them or abusing them, which is crazy because that's a
yeah.
stranger who didn't actually do it, right? And the thing is that they just made that memory up in their mind. Sure, like maybe they were just lying about it and they just wanted someone to go to prison, but that's highly unlikely because this has been tested in many cases, right? So yeah, that's about reconstructive memory. That's just the conceptual part of it, but I think it's extremely it is kind of disturbing, but it is what it is, right? And
Yeah, right.
once we're aware of it, we can use it to our advantage.
I
Not to say that we will like help, I mean, reconstruct someone else's memories, but like we can just be aware that some memories of ours are unreliable, and that we should question what we think we know for certain.
Right. And I found that one bit you said scary, like that study you said. It's just like it's one test that they did where it was in a controlled environment, right? Imagine what happens in real life. A lot of people actually get falsely accused in situations like that. So it's really, can you really, trust your memory in certain situations where, some of the details might be foggy. It's pretty fascinating. I love that idea. But going to a topic that is probably my favorite part of memory is flashbulb memories. Now, so basically what it talks about is how emotion, so it goes under the umbrella of emotions affecting cognition. And what flashbulb memories are basically they're a vivid, like long enduring memory associated with like an a kind of memory with personal consequence, and something that's personally significant, an emotional event, right? Something that you find emotionally arousing. And often, you see this in individuals and people who like okay, let me explain this through an example of a study, right? Because psychology is about studies. I don't want to make this boring, but
Mm,
there's one study called Brown and Kulick, right? By Brown and Kulick. and they were the founders or whatever of Flash Flood Memories, or they suggested it, right? What this study says is that okay, basically there are 44 Americans, 40 Americans,
No, 80.
80 Americans. Sorry, I mean 80 Americans.
Yeah.
80 Americans, right? Divided into two groups, one African Americans and one Caucasian, right?
No,
They're
white.
white, whatever,
Yeah.
40 each, right? And they're given 10 events, right? 9 out of these 10, they're shown 10 events or reminded of, right? 9 out of these 10 events were assassinations of popular or
Famous
ubiquitous
people. Yeah.
American figures. Some assassination, like probably like Martin Luther King and
John F.
John F. Kennedy. And the last the last one was something that's personal. If someone died in your family, that's something that's emotionally arousing, and kind of it shows it's a very personal event, right? So they asked questions, so they reminded them of these events, and they asked questions about it, right? And the results showed that people who had a had more personal consequence related to the assassination or the story itself,
Yeah.
remember the event vividly, or more clear than the other groups. Like, for example, Black Americans, right? They remembered the Martin Luther King event, the assassination, really clearly, and it had a lot of emotional value. And
Yeah.
it's the whole event was so vivid. Whereas if you ask the white population, sorry, of America, they were less inclined to remember it as vividly as the other group did. But they remember the John F. Kennedy event way more vividly, because it's something that they found personal to them, because of the race and everything. And the study also showed that the most personally significant event was their own personal, someone close to them, like their parents dying or something, was the most vivid memory, because it was so close to them. It was tangible, it was touchable, it was so real, right? And that
Yeah.
memory is so vivid. And it's that's, I find it so interesting how, like, emotions can influence cognition and things in your mind. It's fascinating. I really love it.
100%.
uh
100%. So I think we've just covered that big umbrella
yeah.
of memory, and it's crazy because I mean we just explained it. I'd say like as well as our teacher, if not better. But in like what, like half an hour, and this took us like weeks to cover. But okay. Anyways, yeah. Moving on to the next topic, which is something called schema theory. So schema theory, even though it sounds like a very unfamiliar word probably for you, the thing is that schema theory is a very simple concept, but it's very fundamental to the way we think, memorize things, etc., learn things especially. So basically, think of this. So you have a laptop or like a computer, right? In that computer, you have like uh, let's start off with 10 files. You have 10 files. Now it's very easy to just like, let's say one file is for your homework, one file is for music. It's very easy to find out which file is for what, right? Now let's say you have 100 million files, right?
Right.
And then if you have to point out a very specific file, it'll take you hours, if not days, to find that one file. So what do? You organize it in terms of folders. You create one folder for school under which you put homework, classwork, and then under that you break them down into each subject. Under each subject you may break it down into the semester. Under each semester you break it down into the topic, etc. Basically, the point is you organize your brain in a very, and let's say this computer is your brain with 100 million files, like almost an unlimited number of files, and you need to just organize it and classify it, associate it in a very specific manner. And that's exactly what our brain does. So let's say I see the fan in Aryan's background and the fan in my room, right? And I classify them as the same thing, because to me, my schema is that a fan either looks like that or like this, right? So that's my schema. And a schema is simply a mental representation of information. And yeah, I think that's all that schema is, but it's extremely interesting because if you think about it, the way you learn things completely depends on schema. The way
Right.
you remember things completely depends on schema. If I have to elaborate, um, let's say I'm learning maths. Okay, actually, no, I'll use the example I used in class, which was that in chemistry, right, until grade 11 or grade 10 at least, I was taught that the structure of an atom is there's a shell and there's a nucleus, and then there's one ring that's called an orbital, or sorry, a shell, and then there are many of them like that, which are like equally spaced. And this is
Right.
my until 10th grade, this was my existing schema of how an atom looks. Now, in 11th grade, I came and we were taught that there are orbitals, there's this, there's that. And I was like, how can this work with this previous model? But it didn't, right? I mean, there was very limited connection between that. And the thing is that it challenged my old schema, which made it even harder to learn. If I was taught the exact same thing earlier, it would have been so much easier to learn. So basically, because my mental association with the structure of an atom was different earlier, the way I learned it changed completely. Right. So yeah, that's just one example I had.
And I feel like the psychology teacher wouldn't really tell you this, but I kind of want to explain it through a different lens. You know how dystopias is portrayed, right? There's if you guys don't know 1984, it's basically there's this that I'll just like sum it up. Basically, there's this one place, right, that's ruled by this government or this governing thing that no one knows, no one knows
It's
how they
very anonymous, essentially.
that
Like
very
it's an
yeah.
anonymous authority.
And the point here is that they controlled everyone over there, and they gave the orders, and no one could rebel against them because they were the all-seeing eye, the big brother. And basically, what I want to bring out is propaganda, right? Today you may not notice it, but propaganda is everywhere. And
Mm.
one easy way or one easy method for a lot of these people, at the top, people who kind of want to control the majority of the population, is through propaganda, and it's through schemas. So you might not realize it, but there are things like confirmation biases, which is basically you're trapped in this one. Let's say you're in a box, right? And you can't you don't want to leave the box because you feel like the box is the safest place. If there's information, like if you know something, right, you don't want to accept someone else's information because you think your information is the best. And today in society, a lot of people are stuck in that box. They don't keep their mind open. It's
Mm.
because what these people do, or they're very smart, right? Because propaganda basically creates a schema for you. It creates a folder, right, like Sunav said, and it puts everything that they're doing in that folder, and
Mm.
they're making sure that folder is sealed tight and no one
Yeah.
can open it. And um, you don't know, like, there's literally thousands of like gigabytes of information outside that, and you just can't access it because your mind is just stuck in that one folder. And
Yeah.
you're stuck there. So remember, a lot of the times, whenever you're given, like, I could like so I'm not saying this is true, but I was told recently that the 9/11 was staged, or it was faked. I don't want to bring up anything
Yeah, that's
controversial,
just a
but
conspiracy.
yeah, I was like, that's crazy. Like that doesn't sound right at all, because my brain was so tuned to thinking it actually happened, because I've seen it everywhere,
Yeah.
like there was a moment of silence every time, every time the day came. And I saw the news and I saw the videos, right? And then as the person was trying to explain to me why it was fake, I kind of eased down a little bit. I got offended genuinely. I don't know why I got offended, but when I heard about the reasoning, it's still, I still might not agree to it, but I realize that if I do keep my mind open, and I do accept other people's other information, and I don't just reject what I already know and think outside the box for a second, I won't really know what's going on. Like,
Yeah.
I won't be the mediator in between these both sides. I'll literally just be someone who's following that propaganda, and benefiting the people above. And I won't really understand what's happening in this world of ours.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting.
Now, yeah, I think like that's a good example to use, because like your previous schema was that 9/11 was real, and now, I mean, I'm not saying your new schema is that it's fake, but like, I mean, your old schema was definitely challenged, right? Which,
Right.
yeah, so I mean, that's just a cool thing about schema.
And
Yeah.
I brought in another point of I think I talked about the confirmation bias.
Mm,
It's basically coming from a term of echo chambers. It's basically the same thing where it's that box example, except it's a chamber, right? The voices, the echoes everywhere, and you're kind of just stuck in that box. You can't hear anything that's going on outside, and
mm,
that's so interesting. So yeah, I don't know, it's another psychology thing, but connecting these topics is fun, right?
yeah.
So now, do you want to talk about biases now? Because biases
Mm.
are a huge part of psychology, and honestly, I feel like this is by especially by businesses and a lot of constructs or in the infrastructure of
Yeah. They need,
selling,
they rely on the knowledge of biases, right? So it's
right?
extremely important for people to be aware of biases. But I think before we get to biases, we need to talk about thinking and decision making as a whole,
Right.
because these biases do occur in thinking and decision making. So thinking
Right.
and decision making are, of course, just two cognitive processes, which, I mean, you know what they are. I'm not going to explain what
Yeah.
thinking is and decision making is, but basically, the model that was proposed for thinking was that thinking is happens in one of two systems, and it can happen simultaneously or separately, whatever. It happens in system one and system two thinking. I think we did explain this earlier, but
Right.
essentially, system one thinking is rather intuitive, fast, and yeah, intuitive and fast, and it's just like very quick, I guess. That's literally
Yeah.
it. Yeah, that's what system one thinking is. And system two thinking is rather slow, but it's more accurate. It's more like you take your time to logically reason it out. So let's say, like, just to quickly explain system one and system two thinking with an example. Let's say I am okay, let's say I'm learning the tables in math, right? Like the multiplication tables in math. When I try to first remember it, right, I'm using system two thinking to understand that, say, let's say tables of 8, right? So I start with 8. Then to remember what 8 times 2 is, I first add 8 to it, right? So I do 8 plus 8. Oh, 8 times 2 is actually 16. 8
Right.
plus 8 plus 8. 8 times 3 is actually 24. So that's system two thinking, which is slow, but it's accurate, right?
Right.
System one thinking, on the other hand, is like once you've already got that, it's very fast, right? Like it's
Instantly.
really quick, right? So you think 8 times 5, 40, right? So like just
I mean,
essentially,
even that, something that's like very, it's just so instantaneous that it comes naturally and
yeah,
kind of, it's like, okay, let me give you an example. Like
precisely.
I saw this with my dad. He was going on, we were all going on a road trip. It was the middle of the night. We were going pretty fast on the highway,
Hmm.
and there was a person who we couldn't see on the side of the road, right? They were crossing the highway, and the moment my dad had clocked that there's someone right in front of him, his instinct was to turn left and not brake, because braking would he didn't think about it. He knew that his instinct, his system one thinking kicked in, and he just turned left and he avoided the you know
Yeah.
the
On
the
the contrary, I think if you or me or someone who doesn't know how to drive yet, or someone who's still learning how to drive, right?
yeah.
If they were put in the exact same situation, they would first have to like consciously
Access.
think of like, is it this? Like, should I first brake and then like turn left, or should I turn left, or should I just
Right.
like hard brake, right? Whatever it is. So that's just the difference between system one and system two thinking. Now, the interesting thing about this is that since system one thinking is so quick, sometimes it can be a little unreliable because of two things. It can lead to heuristics, which are essentially, or heuretics, not heuristics, sorry, heuretics, which are just mental shortcuts, or
Right.
biases. And these biases are exactly what we're going to talk about right now. So, Aryan, why don't you go ahead?
Well, if you okay, biases are like there are many biases, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Start off
and
with,
start off with.
A few, whichever one.
Right. So, I mean, the most noticeable ones are probably for me. Okay, okay. I want to just mention three. You can talk about more later. I like the I like the anchoring bias, the framing effect. I mean, anchor effect, framing effect. So there are many types of biases, right? And I want to talk about I kind of just mention three in particular. You can talk about more if you want to, but like first there's the anchoring effect and the halo effect and the framing effect. I want to talk about my favorite one, which is the halo effect. It's so interesting how people, so you see this a lot, in everyday situations. It's basically it's a tendency for like a positive impression of a person, company, or brand, or something that's positive, and based on one opinion or feeling that it affects the other areas. And you see this like a lot, right? We talked about system on thinking. Something that people notice, right? The first, like when they see someone, right? How do they define someone's attractiveness, right? The first 5 seconds of them seeing someone, they'd be like, oh, he dresses well, right? If he dresses well, they automatically, it's this effect or this bias, it automatically frames their entire personality, just
Yeah.
whatever, all the areas, all the aspects of their life, just based on one aspect. And if they dress well, you automatically begin to assume that they're smart, right? They're intelligent, other aspects that are a net positive for them, right? Just based on one aspect. And that's a bias that a lot of people see in like a lot of people see today. And in self-improvement, it's also a huge thing, right? If you want to be attractive, and if you want to look good, right? It kind of it reciprocates with other aspects of your life. And it kind of shows, if someone sees how your posture is good, right? It kind of like it's a status symbol, right? Your posture,
Hmm.
it shows how much of the other aspects of life you're kind of building up, and it's positive, right? I love that one in particular. The next one is anchoring effect, right? Anchoring, this is actually another really interesting one, because you see this in a lot of businesses today. Okay.
Yeah.
uh it's like Apple, for example. I'll tell you what it is, right? So anchoring bias occurs when people like rely too much on pre-existing information, and the first information that they find when they're making decisions, right? This is almost like this, but this is for products. Basically, the first thing you see is they brands try to when they market, right? It's very smart. They place an anchor. Okay. So let's say you're in Apple, right? You have an iPad, the iPad 11 Gen or something, right? It's super good. Okay. It has all the functions you need, right? But then you go one step ahead, and there's the iPad 11 Pro Max. Okay. It's a $5,000, I mean 5,000, sorry, 5,000 rupee, increase from the last version. And then there's the iPad, let's say 8th gen. It still
Hmm.
has all the functions that you need, right? For an iPad, it's everything that you need. But when people see that see the iPad 8th gen, they're like, oh, they're already three models, more than that. It's the lowest option, and they feel like it's not worth, because it's not, it's the last thing, it's outdated, right? And then they see the iPad, the current one, the without any Pro Max or whatever, and that's priced at, let's say, 80,000 bucks, right?
Hmm.
And you're like, oh, okay, that's a fair price. It's a good, probably a good thing to buy. And then you're like, but I want a better version of this. Your mind automatically, when you're looking for something to buy, it's the best version, right? But there also, you have to accommodate for things like, for like price, right? So what these marketing geniuses do is basically the next version, right? The Pro Max, it's only it's only 5-10,000 rupees more. Whereas the distance from, I mean, the increase from the 8th gen to the 11th gen is like 40,000 bucks, right?
Hmm.
Such less gap. You're like, oh, if I'm getting this iPad 11, I might as well just get the next version, the better version, because it's
Yeah.
the margin is so less compared to the
Could I
previous.
elaborate?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like the example you used is great. And if we talk about anchors, right? Anchors are just like those numerical values, which
Right.
so a high anchor would be, or say in this case, what they're doing is they're setting a lower anchor, right? Which is
Right.
the price of the iPad, like just the iPad. I don't remember like what gen and all that, but it's
Right.
there's a price of that iPad, and then when you um and then let's say like 80,000 rupees as compared to just 90,000 rupees for a drastic increase in quality, right? Like 10,000 extra doesn't seem like much as compared to the anchor of 80,000, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? And that's why the slight increase in that with the margin of just 10, with the increase in quality with the margin of just 10,000 rupees is what makes it sell more than it would have if they had just offered like just the iPad or just the
And
iPad Pro Max.
and they kind of make you feel like there are only two options, right? The best and the second best. So
Mm.
even if you can't accommodate for the best version, you're still getting the second best, which is just like generally gonna benefit them because it's
Yeah,
like
but it's still expensive, right? It's not like,
still expensive. Yeah,
yeah,
but they make you feel like it's not
100%.
it's worth it, you know.
Right.
And yeah, I was the third effect. I kind of want you to talk about this because you know
Yeah.
it very well. The framing effect. What
Mhm.
do you say about that?
Right. So the framing effect is just the way people frame things has like people tend to change their perception of something just on the basis that it's framed, right? If I said like something selling for $10 versus I say it's selling for $9.99, right? You're more likely to buy it if I say 9.99 rather than 10. And that's a common marketing strategy. And that's
Yeah,
just the way you
it's so
framed it.
simple.
Yeah. And in another case, let's say I frame something like I'm trying to think off my head, but let's say like how rich are you, or like do you have enough money, right? Versus you are very wealthy. If the it's a bad example, but like you get my point, right? They're
Yeah,
framed the same message framed in two different ways, and they will have their own like respective outcome or influence. So that's
yeah,
basically the framing effect. And I want to talk about two more. So there's something called the confirmation bias, which I think many people would be familiar with. The confirmation bias is essentially you tend to confirm to your past knowledge. So let's say I believe that 1 plus 3 is 5, right?
right.
Even if you tell me 1 plus 3 is 4, just because I previously believed that 1 plus 3 is 5, I would still tend to hesitate to change my knowledge to 1 plus 3 equals 5 equals 4, right? So that's the
Right.
thing. So that's why it's a little harder, and that's one tendency that people have, which I mean, whether it's good or bad, that's up to you guys to decide. But I think, yeah, that's just another thing that exists. And the third bias, which I wanted to talk about, was something called asymmetric dominance. Now, I'll spend a little bit of time on this because it's not that easy to explain. So I'll explain it using an example. It's not a study, but it's just like a situation, right? So let's say you want to go on vacation and you're looking at two places with two criteria. So the two criteria are of like possibility or probability of skiing, and the other criteria is like its affordability, like the trip's affordability, right? So basically, the two locations you have are Switzerland and Goa, and you have a very high likelihood of skiing in Switzerland, but it's also very expensive, and you have a and you have a low likelihood of skiing in Goa, and it's very cheap, right, relatively. So basically what happens is that now when you introduce a third and fourth location, let's say this location X, right, is as expensive as Switzerland, but there are less skiing probabilities, right? There's less chance of ski. Switzerland would look like such a good option just because you've introduced something which is like a little worse, right? So this is called asymmetric dominance. When you introduce something with slight asymmetry, your
Right.
like the other thing stands out so much more and it's much more dominant. right? And now in the same way, if you introduce something which has the same skiing possibilities as Goa, which is very little, but it's a little more expensive than Goa, you'll be like, Goa is such a good option. It's so cheap, but it provides me with the same opportunity, right? Again, asymmetric dominance. And that's just, I mean, that's like, that might seem like basic, obvious knowledge to everyone, but that's because that's just how we think. So,
And yeah, so I just want to say this is, um, if you're planning to be like an entrepreneur or something, right? If you want to get into business and all of that, like I never knew I wanted to get into business, right? But I knew that I wanted to be successful in some way, and I knew that psychology was the first step into getting to know myself and to getting to know into getting to know other people, right? And a huge
mm,
part of this world is run by marketing, because you want to get people to do what you want, again, through schemas or whatever. But this asymmetric dominance is also seen in like, because everyone, the whole, the whole uh trope of like business, right?
mm,
It's very competition based, because
yeah,
every niche has other people doing the same thing, right? How do you make yours, how do you make your initiative or whatever you're doing the best out of the lot?
mm,
It's through putting, like, belittling one, and using that to stand, like, you
sure.
can, this is a way, this
Yeah,
is not,
that's one way. Yeah.
it's basically showing that you're the dominant one by by
Mm,
pointing out the cons of the other ones, right? And it's a common marketing strategy. You see this everywhere, like, if this is just something I saw, I don't know if you guys would know this, but there's something called Feastables, which is uh, a chocolate bar created by Mr. Beast, the YouTuber. What he did was he created a commercial which pointed out the bad things. Hershey is a very popular chocolate
mm,
brand. It's known worldwide. And what he did was he pointed out the flaws in Hershey's. This could be seen as a bit direct. It's not seen everywhere, and that people usually try to keep it subtle, and don't try to directly
yeah.
brand.
Yep.
But this is an extreme example of where he pointed out the flaws in Hershey's, and then said how his brand covers for those flaws, and is Hershey's and more, it's better, right? And that's an example of asymmetric.
Exactly. I have another example, which is
Right.
of the exact same thing done by another influencer. So Logan Paul and KSI have their own like sports hydration thing called Prime, right?
Yeah.
And Logan Paul on one of his, I don't know if it was on the Prime account or on one Instagram account, he posted an Instagram video um, comparing the amount of sugar, the amount of electrolytes, and like something else in Prime as compared to like a normal like electrolyte what do you call, like, sachet, right?
Yeah.
And it was like obviously to show that they are the superior brand, and it does the exact same thing. Like, it just shows
Right.
that they're selling the same thing. So in this case, the quantity is like kind of the constant thing, but the quality is the like asymmetrically or the asymmetric element of it, which shows dominance in this brand, right? So I
Right.
think one last thing I wanted to say, and then we can wrap up, is that I was like talking to, so none of us study economics, but I was talking to another friend of mine who does study economics, and they told me that like literally there was one question in the economics textbook asking about what biases affect um like a consumer's or like desire to buy, I guess. Like, I don't remember the exact framing, but um the exact verbatim of the question. But basically the point is that like psychology is everywhere, especially in subjects like economics, and it's extremely interesting to like understand these kind of things, right?
Right.
So I think on that note, like, just to summarize, we had models of memory, then reconstructive and flashbulb memory, as well as schema theory, thinking and decision making, and biases in thinking decision making. If you didn't understand any of the things that we explained, you can go back and rewatch it or just study psychology. But like, I mean, I'd suggest you go back and rewatch it.
Yeah. And I just I want to just drive this point in. Psychology is not a boring subject, because if you want to do something, if you want to achieve some goal, right,
Yeah.
on yourself, if it's with a group of people, it's the number one thing is to understand yourself and the people around you, or whoever your target is, right?
100%.
And one way, I mean, the most efficient way to do that is through understanding the mind. And what psychology does is it provides a structure for why people do the things they do. And it's all in the mind, and all the patterns that you see, that all conducted through different studies. And that's one of the reasons I love this subject, not
100%.
the academic side of it, but for the application,
Yeah.
and how beautiful it really and creative it is. It's truly wonderful. And on that note, uh, we'd like to end the episode, and see you on the next one. Hopefully. Peace. Bye.